Kinderheim 511, the secretive orphanage in former East Germany, which produced the nameless villain only known as Johann Liebert from Monster, The White Room, the infamous raising place for Ainakuji Kiyotaka from Classroom of the Elite, Whammy's House, the orphanage that raised the world's greatest detective Al Laureate, and some of its other L successors. These three institutions were created in different environments for different goals, using different methods and of course different technological capacities. However, today, we are here to determine which is the best in producing students. Obviously, this will include all aspects from physical capabilities, general intelligence for knowledge application, and problem-solving capacity, to emotional and social skills. Additionally, another important aspect will be the general effects the teachings have on the students, since if the students aren't even functional afterward, then no matter how good the teachings are, it won't matter much. But before we start, make sure to subscribe. The goal is 50k, so if you enjoy, sub up. Starting with Kinderheim, the main goal of Kinderheim was to re-educate and mold children into perfect, emotionless soldiers who would be completely obedient to the East German government. To achieve this, the orphanage employed various psychological manipulation techniques, including brainwashing, hypnosis, and operant conditioning. The children were stripped of their names, given number codes instead, and subjected to a system of fear and violence. They were taught that only the strong survive, and that emotions were a weakness. Isolation and grouping techniques were used to desensitize them to human connection and empathy. A particularly disturbing rumor circulated about a boy kept on sleeping pills said to possess words that could destroy a person. This boy was Johann Liebert. He had manipulated the staff and children into killing each other as well. Now we know generally that Johann, alongside Laureate and Kiyotaka, are the golden products of their respective institutions. They are the goals, not the standard. The teachings of Kinderheim 511 were centered around a twisted ideology designed to create utterly obedient and emotionless soldiers for the East German government. The core principle was the suppression of individuality, empathy, and any form of emotional expression. Children were taught that strength was all that mattered, and that weakness, including the display of emotions, was to be eradicated. They were brainwashed to believe that survival depended solely on following the rules and directives of their superiors without question. This was reinforced through a system of constant surveillance, manipulation, and the constant threat of violence. This had fostered a sense of isolation and prevented the formation of genuine human connections. The teachings aimed to transform these children into tools of the state, devoid of independent thought or any moral compass. The methodology employed at Kinderheim to achieve these twisted educational goals was a mix of psychological manipulation and behavioral conditioning. First off, desensitization, commonly referred to as brainwashing, which involves systematically breaking down the children's existing sense of self and replacing it with a new identity aligned with the orphanage's objectives through devoiding them of proper identity of names and instead referring to them by numbers, which was the first step taken. Hypnosis was also used to induce a state of catharsis where repressed emotions were brought to the surface, only to be further suppressed and ultimately extinguished. This was intended to annihilate any future display of emotion, creating individuals incapable of empathy or remorse. Techniques such as negative reinforcement were employed to reinforce desired behaviors. Additionally, the children were subjected to adverse situations such as severe beatings and learned that the only way to escape this punishment was to suppress any emotional response. This created a direct link between obedience and the absence of pain, further solidifying their emotional state. Those deemed unfit were transferred out, further reinforcing the idea that only the most ruthless and obedient would survive. Meanwhile, the successful products of Kinderheim's methods were individuals who exhibited exceptional obedience, a complete lack of emotional response, and a ruthless efficiency in carrying out orders. While the focus was primarily on psychological conditioning, the students were given the minimal required physical training. Presumably, it would be a military-style sort of training. The only purpose of it was to keep the subjects physically fit. On the intellectual end, however, these individuals were highly intelligent, as evidenced by Johann Liebert's manipulative genius and ability to strategize, but like we've already established, Johann isn't the standard for Kinderheim. However, we do know that other students would have held at least a small portion of his manipulative capacity, as quoted by the Another Monster novel regarding the curriculum of 511 Kinderheim. In quote, "They were like debates, but, to put it simply, you know how people are psychologically affected when you bring them up and then drop them down, or put them down before raising them again? You start off by saying you're no good, you're a terrible person, and then they'll panic and lose their identity, making them easily manipulated. You just don't want to face yourself head on. Depending on circumstances, one might lose all self-confidence and end up committing suicide. Modern cults use these techniques to ensnare new members. But the activities at Kinderheim 511 were even more dangerous. They were taught that the greatest weapon one can wield against another person is not guns or strength but words. They were trained to be specialists in manipulation." End quote. These successful specimens were essentially living weapons, devoid of empathy, remorse, or any sense of personal morality. They were the embodiment of the orphanage's goal. Perfect soldiers, entirely at the disposal of the state, but at the horrific cost of their own humanity. They were capable of blending into society, such as when it's shown through the fact that many of these members joined high-ranking positions or became serial killers, such as Wolfgang Grimmer, Stefan Juls, and Adolf Reinhardt, who is commonly more known as Roberto. Overall, Kinderheim has a very low success rate, but of the few students whom are considered valid, they had managed to seamlessly integrate into society, obtaining high status as well as possessing unrealistic emotional and social intelligence. Whammy's house, established by the wealthy inventor and philanthropist Quilish Whammy, also known as Watari, was an orphanage founded in Winchester, England. Initially, it served as a training facility for exceptionally gifted children. However, after the success of the brilliant detective L, who was himself a product of Whammy House, the institution's focus shifted towards cultivating a worthy successor to L. The orphanage is managed by Roger Ruffy, a close friend of Watari, who assumes the role of Watari when Nier becomes the new L. Whammy's house is characterized by its secrecy, with some orphans using aliases instead of their real names, or as known as detective codes. Whammy's house is different from Kinderheim. Well, it's also similarly an orphanage that raises extraordinary students, but instead of developing children to become emotionless leaders, they are trained to mimic L specifically. Unlike the White Room and Kinderheim, where the best specimens were unplanned and rather anomalies, L was a natural who had just happened to be at Whammy's and utilized the tools there at his disposal to nurture his intelligence further. That's why all the upcoming generations of Whammy House were designed to produce specimens close to L in intelligence and skills. Of course, the original idea of Whammy House wasn't to produce a new L per se, but when L had been found by Watari and put in Whammy House, Watari knew that he'd have to create a new L. Originally, Whammy House was just an education to facilitize intelligence and education in children for whatever reason, but now it's to become great detectives. The methodology for the teachings is based on finding kids with innate ability or a knack for certain skills and helping them nurture said skills, while also helping them develop basic police force skills such as logical reasoning and thinking, as well as marksmanship. This is also evident by some of the successful students such as Linda, who became an artist, or Matt, the third smartest student of Whammy's, who specializes in technology. In addition to those two, the better products of Whammy House include the iconic duo Mello and Nier from the 4th generation, as well as one of the students from the 1st generation, Beyond Birthday, who isn't considered a Whammy House student as he left, but you know. The 1st generation was very unplanned and was just a mish of ideas of that Watari decided on, and he tried to produce someone akin to L. Instead, the first successor couldn't live with the idea of having to replace someone with a life such as L's, and took his own life, while the second successor was actually very promising for Watari, and thus was serialized B for backup. Though it must be noted that the narrative doesn't really exactly decide if Beyond was actually comparable to Lawlier or not, as Mello also states that himself and Nier were stated by Watari to have been the closest students ever to L's level, and even then Mello says that the gap felt wider if anything. Quotes from the Another Note novel states, L's children gathered from all corners of the world. Children gathered together, never told each other's names, but even for a genius like Watari, creating a fake L was easier said than done. Even for Nier and I, who were said to be the closest to L, the more we tried to be like him, the closer we got, the farther away he was. Like chasing a mirage. End quote. If we couple this with Nier's statement from the end of the manga that the true way to surpass L was for them to work together, then one could argue that B himself was on the same level as Nier and Mello individually, but otherwise it'd be very hard to make the narrative consistent with each other. Regardless, Whammy's House was able to produce individuals close to their goal nonetheless, a far cry from the White Room or Kinderheim products. Though, if we rate those individuals based on their own skills and capacity, they fall a little short. First off, the social and emotional intelligence aspect is nearly non-existent, exemplified by Matt and Nir's unresponsiveness to danger and lack of empathy to their allies, or Mello's, BB's, and A's extreme aggression and lack of emotional control. All the students that are close to top tend to showcase bad ability to integrate properly into society, with the only possible exception being Mello if you want to consider creating a gang a good application of proper social skills. Nir and B, on the other hand, exhibit antisocial personality disorder-like behaviors, with the former even being stated by the author to not have any capacity for human interactions and his need of actual influence and allies to function at all. Students of Whammies aren't taught any form of particularly manipulative behaviors or knowledge, and instead are mainly nurtured for problem solving, though with a highly carrying degree of success considering the top best students are Nir, Mello, and Matt, which have very large gaps between their mental capabilities. And when it comes to physical capabilities, we can assume that they at least know basic self-defense alongside gun usage, but even then that is slightly speculative. Besides all that, there is not much known about the exact process in how these orphans are found and trained, besides what we do know they are trained on in their best results. The success rate for general specimens in Whammy House is clearly higher than Kinderheim, in addition to having a less extreme environment. However, the quality and consistency of the specimens in contrast isn't as good. And usually where these manipulative behaviors come from people like Nira and Mello or other people like that, like L, it's because of their lower empathy, usually. Finally, we get to the White Room. In order to elevate Japan's standing in the world, Otsumi Ayanokoji figured that learning how to create a generation of exceptionally capable individuals that you could even call perfect was the best way to dominate the political game. As it may, this secretive institution operated under the belief that human potential is not predetermined by genetics, but can be meticulously molded through a controlled environment. To achieve this, the White Room took children from infancy and subjected them to a rigorous, highly specialized upbringing, stripping away anything deemed extraneous to their development. The curriculum was intense, pushing students to master a wide array of disciplines from advanced academics to professional level combat skills. Specimens from the first generation alone who were taught under Suzukake's prototype curriculum were already doing basic arithmetic as well as basic acrobats at the age of 3. Additionally, they could also play the piano as well as a trained adult, which is massively impressive for children at only the age of 3. This curriculum was the one used and expanded upon for the White Room, where a difficulty system was constructed and built upon to make the curriculum harder for each generation to test the human limits, which ended up being around the 6th level, imposed on the 7th generation. After which, all upcoming generations would have mixed curriculum until there can be a way to break through that limit. Obviously, the only exception is Kiyotaka's generation, the 4th generation. It was treated with the beta curriculum, one that was much higher than the 10th level, which was originally meant to be the highest they'd test on. Otsumi had wanted his son to be tested upon with this beta level, which is why the 5th generation was enforced with the 4th level rather than the 5th. With that said, similar to Whammy's house, we don't know much about the students besides a few named ones, 3 from the 4th generation and 2 from the 5th. However, we do have an idea that at least most generations retain a good amount of the students, save for the 4th generation where only 1 remained, and the 7th in which none remained. This would mean its consistency is higher than most Whammies and Kinderheim, though the dropouts weren't salvageable and had a lot of struggles integrating back into society. However, what sort of methodology caused this sort of weird mix between Whammy House's consistency and Kinderheim's failure rate? Well, the White Room's training is all about making a systematic life. For the students, they have a set time for all their studies, exams, and training. There's a designated amount of time for eating, going to the bathroom, and sleeping. There's no room for personal input in these actions, and the instructors show no mercy to the kids, whether it be a boy or a girl. They are beaten senseless by professional fighters. They be examined every day on their academical studies, and depending on the difficulty level, they require minimal score to not drop out. For the 4th generation, we know they are studying on the level of a master's degree for all academical subjects since the age of 11. Additionally, they are taught all sorts of cultural acts such as tea ceremony, as well as playing musical instruments such as the piano and violin. Their days don't last enough to let them cope with their situation, as they also had to live through life-like simulations that put their lives at the edge at all moments. From getting killed at sleep to getting poisoned in their food, the more time passed, the harder the curriculum became. The isolated environment additionally left no room for comfort or mental rest. The students are raised with a competitive mentality, especially those in the 5th generation, which were induced with the idea that they are worthless if they couldn't surpass Kiyotaka Ayanokoji from the 4th generation. This caused many to worship him, ultimately giving up on being the best themselves, though that was far from the institution's true goal, as they wanted to create multiple individuals with equal superiority. The result of this sort of training from the specimens we could observe were students with extremely extensive knowledge on the outside world despite never experiencing it firsthand. Both Yagami and Amazawa were able to blend in completely with normal students of their own age, with both of them interacting with Kiyotaka up close and having him doubt the likelihood of the students from the White Room being able to reach this level of acting no matter how much training they put in. Both show masterful adaptability to not only the advanced nurturing high school environment, but also the rules they have to follow to continue with their personal goals. They're able to strategize on a large scale, like in the Uninhibited Island exam, where Yagami was controlling the first years to test Kiyotaka and gain information on his behavior, while Amazawa was neutralizing all of Yagami's more dangerous tactics behind the scenes, and even evading the traps he had placed in prediction for her to interfere with him. She was even able to deduce the complex relationship between Yagami and Tsukishiro, and used it to defend Kiyotaka on the final day from Suzune and Ibuki's interference, of which Yagami had planned in advance. While it can be said that the White Room must teach some levels of psychology in both theory and practical research, Yagami and Ichika go beyond textbook definitions and are able to manipulate students with complex psyches such as Kushida, Riku, and Tsubaki. Though their physical capacity is by far the highest out of the three institutions, with Yagami and Amazawa being able to traverse many areas of the island in a short period, and even being much stronger than Nanase, who was trained personally by Tsukishiro. And she was able to even force Kiyotaka to take her seriously in battle and having to focus well in order to threaten her with accurate blows. Additionally, they were able to train with Shiba when they were children, meaning they have grown much stronger since. Overall though, it might not be standardized for all students from what we can tell through observing the narrative and the known successes. The White Room trains students to be highly perceptive to all forms of auditory and visual cues, being masterful in physical and intellectual battles alike, as well as having the ability to act just like any layman. Overall, the final tallies are as follows. When it comes to social and emotional intelligence, the best results are Kinderheim equaling to White Room over Wami's house. Kinderheim has the best practical examples of students integrating into the real world, though their actual emotions have been completely stumped. They serve as a nice contrast to the White Room students whom display great social and emotional capacities but lack the demonstration of it in a setting outside advanced nurturing high school. Wami House does not necessarily produce bad results, but the students of the institution tend to not be that compatible with laymen, with even L himself staying extremely isolated before the Kira case. When it comes to physical capabilities, the best results are White Room over Kinderheim over Wami's house. This is self-explanatory, though it could be an unfair category to compare, as physical capabilities aren't exactly the main focus for Kinderheim and Wami's house, unlike with the White Room, so it won't affect the final results that much. When it comes to problem solving and general intelligence, the best results are White Room over Wami house over Kinderheim. The White Room students showcase the best feats for overall intelligence between the three institutions, with having better adaptability, reasoning, and strategic abilities, with Wami's house falling through due to the focus on police work. And finally, Kinderheim, which mostly focused on mental fortitude and overall manipulation rather than general intelligence. When it comes to the consistency of specimens, the best results are White Room over Wami's house over Kinderheim. For the quality to quantity ratio of specimens, the best results are Kinderheim over White Room over Wami's house. And lastly, the failure rates from highest to lowest are Kinderheim equal to or greater than White Room over Wami's house. Overall, if we were to compare the general success in producing high capable people, assuming a mixed specimen of average and gifted students, the best institutions would be 1. The White Room, 2. Wami's house, 3. Kinderheim, 511. Kinderheim has the worst efficiency and consistency, so while it can produce great students, the vast majority end up destroyed beyond repair. Wami's house balances more consistency for a little less quality, with the students still being able to contribute to society, even if not on a scale such as the Kinderheim successes. The Wami's house successes are much more versatile in their specialties and can be nurtured even further if needed. At top is the White Room with the highest capacity for the most range of students that can be used, where even average students can be trained to be equal to highly gifted ones, though it does have the same downside as Kinderheim, with the failed students being incapable of going back to the normal world. The rate of students whom can succeed is much higher in contrast, and they still have the capacity to be nurtured if they show enough promise. And obviously, because Wami's house does focus on a goal of detective work, you could also see that being the reason why it does rank lower than the White Room, for example. Kinderheim as well, with its specific goal, with the White Room being mainly a goal of producing the highest quality of human rather than a specific type of job occupation. Ultimately, it seems like Japan will climb the ranks in the political game very soon.